Hello folks, here we are again. Today I have decided to have a look around Kennall Vale Nature Reserve. It was once the site of the Kennall Vale Gunpowder Works. So let's have a wander through and see what we can find. Okay, let's step back in time. Welcome to Kennall Vale. What we see around us today is peaceful woodland, but back in 1812 this was the site of a busy gunpowder works set up by Benjamin Sampson and his partners John F. Devonshire and Edward Allen. The works were laid out across 20 acres of forest land for safety reasons, with buildings strategically separated by blast walls. The River Kennall is only about 6 miles in length, but it provided enough power to drive up to 40 water wheels as it made its way out to the sea. So this is the packing house, where all the gunpowder was stored, ready for dispatch. I think they only seem to have logs today. At one point there were 56 buildings, all tucked away in these woods for the gunpowder works. There's quite a deep base to that one. At its peak, about 50 people worked here, producing thousands of barrels of gunpowder each year. Not for the army, but for Cornwall's mines. In fact, most of the mining in West Cornwall relied on powder made right here. If we go over here, we should be able to see the quarry. A viewing platform, no less. And here we are. Lots of still dark water. And here is the fireplace. Well away from the rest of the works. You wouldn't want any sparks travelling. This is the tail end of the quarry. The birds are singing. We're getting closer to the River Kennall and the incorporating mills. It's still a very busy river. The river powered the machinery and kept the explosives factory safely tucked away in the valley. We'll go clambering through here. Luckily I've got my clambering boots on, so just as well. Not really the terrain for flip-flops. Got little signs on the houses to say which they were, what their purpose was. It's very difficult to see on a map where everything's supposed to be by the time you walk through all the trees. Just a small doorway. There's a very big wall there. I suppose when we look back, they wouldn't have wanted just the general public wandering along through the gunpowder works. So it was all very enclosed for safety reasons. Can't see much from here. Let's have a wander. When you see all the pieces of granite lying around in huge piles, it's not hard to imagine that most of these would have been buildings. They had to squeeze 56 buildings in here somehow. For instance, the cooperage made barrels from shaped wooden staves that were driven together and hooped, then fitted with heads, tops and bottoms. Barrels for gunpowder had to be especially tight and well made to keep out damp. They almost certainly used oak staves for the barrels, because oak was the standard for staves in powder barrels. It was strong wood and made of a very tight fit. For hoops, they probably used wooden hoops, hazel, ash, etc., specially made for barrels that stayed on site or that didn't undergo rough handling or transport. Wooden hoops would reduce the risk of sparks. For barrels intended for transport, or barrels which needed more durable hoops, they likely used copper hoops and copper rivets. Many of the buildings that used to stand here no longer exist, of course. For instance, the sawmill played a major role at the works, powered by a water wheel again from the River Kennall. They would have produced gunpowder barrels. The sawmill produced the staves, the lids and other wooden parts for the barrels, and then the cooper would put them together. The sawmill would also make packing crates and boxes for shipping smaller quantities, and of course all the structural timber that was needed, all the roof joists, roofs themselves maybe. They also had a tramway infrastructure across the site, so they needed sleepers for that. The charcoal house is another one that is no longer here that we can see. It's another building that was essential in the production of gunpowder, but again, we can only imagine what it might have looked like. As well as the main packing house, there was a packing bunting house, which could have been this one for all we know. A bunter was a worker who did the packing from the action of bunting, pressing and ramming down the powder into casks. There's supposed to be another building somewhere around here called the Stove House, which I haven't been able to find, and I couldn't find any reference to it or where it is online. But it's where the gunpowder was carefully dried over steam-heated flues. Damp powder was useless, but applying heat in a place like this, it was a necessary nightmare. While researching historical images of the Kennall Vale Gunpowder Works, I found none taken during its period of operation. This is hardly surprising. Photography was still in its infancy at the time, and even if a local photographer had wished to document the site, the use of magnesium flash powder would have posed an obvious and unacceptable risk within such an explosive environment. There's a very big wall there. I suppose when we look back, they wouldn't have wanted just the general public wandering along through the gunpowder works, so it was all very enclosed for safety reasons. If you look around, you can still spot the remains of the old mills, water wheels, and the leat system that carried water through the site. These ruins are rare survivors of Cornwall's industrial past. The change house. Before a worker even stepped foot near the powder, their day began with a strict safety routine. They'd have to use a change house, swapping their everyday clothes for specially made woolen overalls. Even their boots were covered in woolen socks. Why? Because a single spark from a static clung shirt or a nailed boot could be catastrophic. Now imagine this in the biting cold of a Cornish winter. They worked freezing cold because lighting a fire to warm up was simply unthinkable. The danger started before they even touched the ingredients. This is one of the man-made leats or water channels that were used to power all the water wheels. So this would have been rushing with water at one point. Let's move over there, have a look. It's all quite overgrown and a bit difficult to get to sometimes, but here we are. Big building right against the wall. We'll see where there would have been rafters there, because obviously it was a two-storey building. Where's a one-storey building when you've got one floor above the first floor? I'm sure somebody might correct me. Nice view if you worked here, as long as you didn't get your head blown off. So I'm walking in one of the leats, which is fine because it's a nice little path. You can see the view over the top. There's one of the many incorporating mills. You look through the hole. These massive, thick-walled buildings are the incorporating mills, the true heart of the operation. Inside, Giant limestone wheels weighing tons would grind and mix the three ingredients: saltpeter, sulphur and charcoal. This was the most volatile stage. These incredibly thick walls and the lightweight tin or planked wooden roofs were designed to do one thing: if there was an explosion, to blow outwards and upwards, channeling the force away from the workers and hopefully saving the other buildings. This would have been one of the wheels powered by the water wheel next door, and then the cogs would have turned wheels in this part of the building. So this is where the water would have come down from the leat, and then over here is where the remains of a water wheel hangs, but that's where the water would have been turning the wheels and then flowing back into the river. It's all very clever 19th century engineering. This was another lovely part of the house for mixing. It looks like it's lost the top of it. This is the scene of the very first recorded tragedy here. The first major explosion at Kennall Vale occurred on Friday 17th of February 1826 around 12:30. Elizabeth Rutter, aged 68, had walked from her home in Cornwall with roasting potatoes for the workers. A spark carried on her clothing, or the tray, ignited inside one of the buildings. Although men noticed it immediately, the ember fell and caused an instant explosion. 2 men escaped with minor injuries and later described the incident. Elizabeth was badly burned and she died that evening. And another man, identified only as Weeks, I don't know what his first name was gravely injured and died 2 days later. A tragic everyday act of kindness ending in disaster. That was the reality of life here. There's another opening from a leat, and a huge gap where another water wheel would have stood, powering the tumbling wheels inside to mix all the ingredients. There's the inside of another one. You'll notice these buildings are either side of the water wheel. So now, I think we've got some interesting steps to get down. Oh yes, there we go. We'll just hold on to these. Ooh. Thankfully there's a handrail partway way down. Let's go there. Do. We can see inside this one. What's left of it anyway? I imagine the hole in the wall would have had a spindle coming through it with more tumbling wheels inside. It's nice to put a gate there so nobody falls down that huge gap. So we'll carry on. Just have a sit down, I think, for a minute. Why not? Looks like there's some volunteers working over there. They've got some yellow coats on. Don't know what they're doing, but good for them. On another occasion, another tragedy befell John Martin in 1841. On the 8th of January, just 8 weeks into his job at the powder mills, 29-year-old John Martin was killed in an explosion of unknown cause. Around 7 AM, a tremendous blast blew the roof off one of the mills and into the air. Its sound could be heard for miles and strong enough to shake houses in the nearby village. At the coroner's inquest in Ponsanooth, John Carleon, Esquire, was told Martin's head was found a quarter of a mile away, with other remains scattered around the works. The verdict was accidental death. John Martin left behind a wife, Grace, who he had married in 1835, and their 2 small children, John Henry, aged 5, and little Grace, aged 3. Okay, let's go. It was quite a busy place. Up or down? Let's carry on. There's a lot of workers over that side. I don't know what they're doing. I'll just measure this piece of water. It's 1.5 yards. Who knows? Another incorporating mill. Another leat. There's a lot of people there. I don't know if it's council, archaeologists, students, who knows? They've all got a high vis on at least, so they don't bump into each other. Oh, more interesting steps. It's good they made this easy access for the public. Oops, there we go. The first thing to get your head around is the silence. Now replace that with a constant thunderous roar, not just from the river, but from a dozen water wheels powered by this elaborate network of channels called leats. This was the factory's beating heart. That's a good safety barrier, but I'm sure the wooden one was there first and it's succumbed to nature. Today the Cornwall Wildlife Trust looks after this beautiful reserve. As we wander, you'll notice mossy walls, hidden arches and tree roots weaving through the ruins. It feels almost like stepping into a fairy tale forest, but with a story deeply rooted in Cornwall's history. Waterfalls, inlets, ferns, steps up and down. And we've got some autumn berries on the tree. We'll go down further. The waterfall's quite powerful. That's by the shape of it, it's another incorporating mill. And we have half of a building this side. It's an interesting landscape. Obviously it was a good plan to build gunpowder works here because it kept the blast away if there were any accidents. Inside this little building. You can only imagine what they look like in their heyday. There's the Victorian road bridge. So I'll have to name these places afterwards if I can find them. Oh, that's an interesting tree stump. Again, the roots all taking over. After mixing, the gunpowder cake was brought here to the press house to be compressed, making it even more powerful. You can see from the these walls are known as blast walls, which have been built around the building to take some of the force if there's an explosion, which unfortunately there was. The delicate work required immense pressure, and on a Monday morning in November 1887, this building vanished in an instant. A massive explosion killed William Dunstan instantly. His body was blown apart. His colleague James Paddy, a cart driver who was just collecting a load, was found alive but terribly injured in a leat. William Dunstan, born in Stithians in 1843, lived in Penryn's paper mill yard with his wife Alice and their 9 children. He worked as a gunpowder pulverizer. James Paddy, aged 60, lived in Tremenhere with his wife Elizabeth and 2 sons. He was a wagon driver transporting powder with his horse and cart. At about 8 AM, a massive blast destroyed the upper press house, scattering stone, timber and slate and shattering nearby windows. A crowd gathered at the gates, relieved at the first reports of only 1 dead and 1 injured. Paddy was found in a leat, burned and badly cut, but still alive. The horse appeared to have bolted away from the exploding press house, having only slightly singed hair and a small cut from a piece of glass. Dunstan's body was blown apart, discovered in pieces up to 40 yards away. Dr. Blamey of Penryn attended the scene and instructed that James Paddy be transported, probably by horse and cart, to the Royal Cornwall Infirmary, some 8 miles distant in Truro. Paddy recalled only seeing a bright flash as he collected powder from Dunstan. 5 days later, his leg was amputated. James Paddy languished in his hospital bed for 23 days. And on the 30th of November 1887, he died of his injuries. Dunstan left behind his widow and 9 children, and the village of Ponsonooth held a fundraiser to support them. It wasn't just an industrial accident. It was a personal tragedy that shattered families. Further up the slope, the process continued, each step designed to make the powder safer and more effective. In the Corning house, the pressed cake was broken down into grains. Although called gunpowder, the finished product was actually granular. It was easier and safer to store in barrels that way. It was glazed to smooth the grains and finally dusted to remove any fine, dangerous powder. You notice how these buildings are all spaced far apart and often protected by blast walls. Every part of the site's layout was a calculated risk. So, if we're looking at the entire operation, incorporation was wet mixing of charcoal, saltpetre and sulphur, which were ground and mixed with a little liquid to make a wet paste. That was called the mill cake. This keeps the ingredients evenly blended and reduces a dust hazard. Pressing was what happened to this mill cake after that. It was placed either under a screw or hydraulic press to squeeze out liquid and compact it into dense press cake. Pressing increased the density and the burning power of the powder. The press cake was fed into the Corning house or kernelling mill, where it was broken up and forced through tooth rollers or bronze zinc tooth wheels and screens to produce grains of roughly even size. Early methods simply forced the damp cake through sieves. Later mechanised mills used rollers and knives. Glazing and dusting. The sieved grains were tumbled in glazing barrels, often with a little graphite, historically called black lead, to polish and coat the grains, which reduced dust and made them more weather resistant. It improved the flow. Final drying completed the process before packaging. Cornish mining and quarrying demanded thousands of small, consistent blasting charges. Having a dedicated compressed cartridge house on site, which is another one we can't see now, it meant that works could be supplying ready-made, ready-to-use charges directly to the mines rather than shipping only loose powder. The works closed in 1910, overtaken by dynamite and the decline of Cornish mining, and then nature began its slow, gentle reclamation. Mosses, ferns and trees crept over the stonework, softening the edges of industry. But some say the past isn't entirely quiet. Visitors sometimes report strange things. Some people have reported seeing a man standing the other side of this bridge. So we'll take these stories with a pinch of salt, but who knows? People have heard the muffled sound of a distant explosion, a shout of pain, or men's voices carrying on the wind. Shadows moving where no one is standing, and the overwhelming feeling of being watched. Are they the spirits of lives brutally cut short? Whether you believe in ghosts or not, this valley undeniably holds a powerful energy. It's a place of eerie beauty and quiet reflection, where the boundary between a peaceful present and a violent past feels incredibly thin. The peaceful nature reserve, forever hiding its powerful and explosive secrets. If you've stuck with me this far, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. It costs nothing, but helps me make more videos. And we'll see you next time.